Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen of Pop Culture, and a look today at the official Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide by Gary Gygax. This is the big one. I've been putting this one off for a little bit because there's a lot of material in it to cover, and this might actually just become part one of a part two series. I have not actually decided yet, but let's crack into it without too much delay. Now you notice this is one of the later printings with the different cover. This is the first one I got when I was in junior high. I still managed to have it after all these years. So, there we go. Get it nice and focused. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Special Reference Work Dungeon Master's Guide. A compiled volume of information primarily used by Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. They really nail that, don't they? In bold and trademark. Game referees, including, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Copyright 1979, TSR Games. Illustrations by David C. Sutherland III, D.A. Trampier, Darlene Picoul, Will McLean, David S. LaForce, Errol Otis. Covered by David C. Sutherland III, except that's not correct, because they didn't change this when they changed the covers. So what we have here is a cover by, I believe, Jeff Easley. Yes, by Jeff Easley. And a great one, great cover. The other one, awesome as well. And they actually do even, somewhere in here, maybe the next page, yes, cover. The book cover painting shows an encounter between three adventurers and an Efreet on the elemental plane of fire. The fabled city of brass can be seen floating over a flame-swept sea of oil. So again, no, not this cover, but that was the original cover. And if you don't know what it looks like, you can absolutely find it out there on the internet. The foreword is by Mike Carr. We won't go heavy into that because we have so much Gygax goodness to roll through. We'll flip right through there. There's quite a bit in his preface that I think is important and worth reading. So we'll go through a few lines here. What follows herein is strictly for the eyes of you, the campaign referee. As the creator and ultimate authority in your respective game, this work is written as one dungeon master equal to another. Pronouncements there may be, but they are not from on high as respects your game. Dictums are given for the sake of the game only. For if Advanced Dungeons & Dragons is to survive and grow, it must have some degree of uniformity, a familiarity of method and procedure from campaign to campaign within the whole. And that also might touch a little bit on the issue of the campaigns that were being, well, not necessarily campaigns, but the games that were being played at conventions. There was a need to kind of formalize some rules to make sure that, you know, players were playing competitively. They're getting scored. Players playing through a module in a Philadelphia convention and one's in Wisconsin and one's in Los Angeles, you need to have something common in how those games are being adjudicated so that you can trust that the points they're earning are being earned fairly. And is it because, well, one DM's kind of doing things his way and another one's a lot harsher, you know, etc. So there was a little bit of that. And they did really have the idea, too, that characters could jump from campaign to campaign to campaign. And so it would be helpful if they all worked along pretty similar lines to make that possible. But he says here, when you build your campaign, you will tailor it to suit your personal tastes. In the heat of play, it will slowly evolve into a compound of your personality and those of your better participants, a superior alloy. And as long as your campaign remains viable, it will continue a slow process of change and growth. In this lies a great danger, however. The systems and parameters contained in the whole of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons are based on a great deal of knowledge, experience gained through discussion, play, testing, questioning, and hopefully personal insight. Limitations, checks, balances, and all the rest are placed into the system in order to assure that what is based thereon will be a superior campaign, a campaign which offers the most interesting play possibilities to the greatest number of participants for the longest period of time possible. So he's saying, yeah, things are going to change. You're going to personalize your campaign, but the danger is in getting so far away from this that maybe the game starts to break down a little bit and you lose something. So anyway, some good stuff here. And again, he also kind of talks a little bit about the need for you to understand those rules before you start messing around with them. And that's in this introduction as well. In fact, he says here, know the game systems and you will know how and when to take upon yourself the ultimate power, to become the final arbiter rather than the interpreter of the rules. Can be a difficult and demanding task, and it cannot be undertaken lightly, for your players expect to play this game, not one made up on the spot. By the same token, they are playing the game the way you, their DM, imagines and creates it. So he's saying, again, it's cool. You're going to make changes at some point, you're going to have different ways of doing things, but make sure you understand the rules. So if you do make an alteration, it doesn't break everything and doesn't make it impossible for the players, some of whom may have started in other campaigns, to understand what you are doing. And so he goes over the format of this thing, kind of starts with stuff related to the player's handbook. He tries to, here he says, I have made every effort to give the reasoning and justification for the game. So he explains, this is why we do things a particular way. And again, and then talks about a little bit about the system. We have a section on dice. We're not going to go into that heavily, but you do get the bell curve from the 3d6 rolling, but also just to make you understand, when you're rolling multiple dice, it's going to have, it's not going to be the same as just rolling a single dice in terms of the percentage chance of a particular number coming up. You know, some of this stuff is kind of new, honestly, to people. It's not maybe something they've thought about, rolling all these dice. So he's trying to explain that. We get use of miniature figures within the game. Get a little bit here about other things you can use, including, here's their address if you want to find stuff up. He mentions White Dwarf, because White Dwarf was pretty much a mostly advanced D&D magazine back in the late 70s. It did some other stuff as well, but it was a little bit more tied in with that. And Games Workshop was more, it was kind of an affiliate in a way of TSR. Things changed, obviously. Then we get creating the player character and the generation of ability scores. Now, the most basic method, of course, is 3d6 down the line. And that's from, the more basic expert stuff. But he doesn't go that way here. He says, while it is possible to generate some fairly playable characters by rolling 3d6, there's often an extended period of attempts at finding a suitable one due to quirks of the dice. Furthermore, these rather marginal characters tend to have short life expectancy, which tends to discourage new players, as does having to make do with some character of a race and or class, which he or she really can't or won't identify with. Okay, so some of us real old school people are like, dude, to us, that's kind of the point. You don't know what you're going to end up with. And it's fun to sort of just, hey, I didn't plan on playing this, but that's cool. I'll play it anyways and check it out. But he's looking at tailoring things a little bit more to players. Remember, the game at this point is hitting some pretty big sales numbers. It's getting a more mass audience. And, I think there's an element of trying to make sure that it works for that mass audience, that they stick with it. So we get these different methods. Method 1, all scores recorded and arranged in the order the player desires. 4d6 are rolled, and the lowest dice or die is discarded. Method 2, all scores are recorded and arranged as in method 1. 3d6 are rolled 12 times, and the highest 6 scores are retained. Method 3, scores rolled are according to each ability category in order, strength, intelligence, wisdom, etc. 3d6 are rolled 6 times for each ability, and the highest score in each category is retained for that category. Wow. So we've gone from rolling 12 times to now 36 times to get the highest scores you can. Method 4, 3d6 are rolled sufficient times to generate the 6 ability scores in order for 12 characters. And then you pick the one that you like the best. Now, personally, I still like roll 3d6 in order and take what you get. But also keep in mind, with Advanced D&D, there's a little bit more, the ability scores mean a little bit more than they do in earlier versions of the game. So they start to become a little bit more critical. Now, I still think, well, you can still just tailor the game to, what's reasonable in terms of the scores people might get. But okay, things were changing. Get a little bit about non-player characters and how to work with them. Roll 3d6 for each ability as usual, but use average scoring by considering any 1 as a 3 and any 6 as a 4. There's stuff like that in there. And special characters, and you can roll for them. This is kind of cool. The effect of wishes on character ability scores. So already players are getting obsessed with high scores. So wishes are a way to do that. But he says, here, let's see, it's quite usual for players to use wishes or alter reality spells to increase their ability scores. Whatever the area might be, it is strongly suggested that you place no restrictions upon such use of wishes. However, at some point it must be made more difficult to go up in ability, or else many characters will eventually be running around with several 18s or even higher. Although with some of these methods, I think that was probably happening anyways. Therefore, when any ability score reaches 16, then it should be ruled a wish will have the effect of increasing the ability by only 1/10 of a point. Thus, by means of wishes, a charisma score of 16 can only be raised to 17 by use of 10 such wishes. The score going from 16 to 16.1, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that slows that down a little bit. We have a little bit on characteristics for player characters. It says use of NPC personality traits and characteristics for player characters is not recommended. You're supposed to be inventing a unique character all your own. We get the non-professional skills here, the secondary skills that will sort of over time start to morph into a skill system, the non-weapon proficiencies. It's not really necessarily a gleam in anyone's eye at this point, but it's going to go there someday. And I believe it's Oriental Adventures is where we first get the non-weapon proficiency system, like in an official kind of rule book. Starting level of experience, you should start at first, but if it's a new player coming into an established group, maybe you start a little bit higher. But he kind of talks about how, but if you do, they may not understand how hard it is to get to that higher level. And he still is only suggesting maybe like 2nd or 3rd or 4th level at the most. Character age, aging, disease, and death. Well, now remember, this is one where, you have spells that can increase age. You have monster powers that can increase a person's age, make them old. Well, how long do you live? It goes through all of that kind of stuff. Unnatural aging, magical aging causes and what they actually do. Most of them not that big. Now, keep in mind, this is, to an extent, an extra ability of the non-human races, although not the half-orc, which the half-orc tends to not live as long as a human being. But most of the other ones do, and their age ranges, young adult, mature, etc., are much longer. So a human getting hit with something that aged him 10 years is going to be affected far more than, say, an elf. Doesn't mean it doesn't impact the elf at all, but maybe not in a sort of a visceral way, because we have here what you do for each age category a character is in as they go through these different age categories, involving losing points of ability scores. So that's where it can really hit you. So it's a weakness for half-orcs, who frankly have a lot of weaknesses. There's a lot of issues with half-orcs. I'm not sure why people played them, other than they thought it would be fun to be a half-orc for the most part, because they do have a lot of problems, but also impacts human characters. We got disease. Now, this is interesting here. Each game month, you may wish to check each character to determine whether or not he or she has contracted a disease or disorder. Check each week if conditions are particularly favorable. For example, very hot weather or hot moist weather, filthy crowded conditions in warm weather. weather. Now, why that's kind of interesting. One of the things you get in the DM's guide and with Gygax's version of this game is the importance of time. It takes a while for a character to heal up. It can take a while to get spells back. And we're gonna look at some other stuff as we go through here. Keeping track of time is important, and time has a real impact on the game. So if characters are potentially coming down with diseases, that can take that character out of play for a time period. And if you're paying attention to your campaign world, and say your characters, the party wanted to go after a particular dungeon, it's in northern areas, so they need to do it in the spring or summer, but now somebody's disease means it's pushing it a little further along. It's going to be really cold. Now we're going to have to deal with all that kind of stuff. That's a part of advanced D&D. Now, when I played, mostly basic expert with, using AD&D as a toolbox, we didn't worry much about that. We didn't really even have campaigns. Somebody'd buy a new module. We'd run the party through it. We just played it more like popping open a game of Risk. But if you're playing true advanced D&D, all that timekeeping is important. And so, of course, look, this is D&D. We love tables, so we get lots of tables for the kinds of diseases and what the disease does, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Severity, a lot of good stuff there. But again, it's something a lot of people don't worry about, but it really is an important part of the game. We go through death due to age. So there's determination of maximum age. There's examples of maximum age determination, in other words, how it works. But the idea would be, you kind of, and maybe the player doesn't know this, but the DM does, a particular character has a maximum age they can reach. So again, if they're getting aged by a monster attack or a spell, some might come to an end before others come to an end. We get an explanation here of the character abilities: strength, exceptional strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, con, and charisma. Important stuff, but we've gotten a little bit of that already, from the player's handbook. The character races, player character racial tendencies. Remember, we talked about that a little bit in terms of which, dwarves don't really like elves, and elves don't really like dwarves, and half-orcs don't really like anybody. But this also kind of gives you some ideas, a sort of a mainstream of what a dwarf is, what an elf is. I always end up reading the dwarf one. Let's read the gnomes for this one. Gnomes are most lively and full of humor, often on the black side or practical jokes. They enjoy eating and can drink as much as dwarves do. They are sly and furtive with those they do not know or trust, and even somewhat reserved with most bigger folk, such as elves or humans. Gnomes love all sorts of precious stones, and they are masters of gem polishing and cutting. In most other respects, they are not unlike dwarves, but they enjoy the open world of growing things almost as much as their mines and burrows. And half-orcs. Half-orcs are boors, not boars, even though, you had the pig-nosed orcs back in the day, but boors. They are rude, crude, crass, and generally obnoxious. Oh, that's why people like playing them. Because most are cowardly, they tend to be bullies and cruel to the weak, but they will quickly knuckle under to the stranger. This does not mean that all half-orcs are horrid, only most of them. It neither means that they are necessarily stupid nor incapable. They will always seek to gain the upper hand and dominate those around them so as to be able to exercise their natural tendencies. Half-orcs are greedy, too. They can, of course, favor their human parent more than their orcish one. So mostly, half-orcs sound like politicians. We get character classes. Followers for upper-level player characters. Again, remember, that's a big part of advanced D&D, is that the sort of game after the game. You adventure in dungeons, but eventually you are going to be accumulating enough wealth to build a stronghold and attract followers. And now you have a whole separate game of managing your domain and fighting battles with other lords. And that's where miniature combat rules come in, which, remember, that's where D&D starts. It starts in a miniature war game. So we get all that. We get so all the different tables for their followers. We get a little bit more here on multi-class assassins. The Paladin's Warhorse. If the character loses paladinhood for any reason, there will be an immutable enmity between character and mount, and the former will not be able to ride the latter. Well, it wouldn't be the other way around, probably, while the steed will escape at first opportunity. Actually, what if you take that seriously, it means that while the paladin cannot ride the warhorse after he loses paladinhood, technically the warhorse could probably ride the paladin, although that might be difficult to pull off. Spying, we get a little bit more on the assassin spying table, and how all that works. Spy failure table. Oh, also, again, here's that time thing. A simple spying job takes 1 to 8 days. Now, again, Gygax is assuming a sort of timekeeping where you're really paying attention to this stuff. So again, if the party is like, well, we're going to go into that, cave system again, and the assassin in the party is on a difficult spying mission, which could last up to 40 days, he might not be available to go on the adventure, and that player would have to use a different character. There was an idea that players would have multiple characters that they could send on adventures. It wasn't always going to be the same one, not every time, although they probably would have one that was sort of their favorite that they would use the most often. We get an explanation of thief abilities. Hide in Shadows gets a big chunk here. It says, as is plainly stated in Player's Handbook, this is never possible, hiding in shadows, under direct or even indirect observation. If the thief insists on trying, allow the attempt and throw dice, but don't bother to read them, as the fool is as obvious as a coal pile in a ballroom. Likewise, if a hidden thief attempts movement while under observation, the proverbial jig is up for him or her. So it kind of gives you a little bit more understanding how that ability really works. You get climbing with how quickly you can climb up different surfaces. We do have very smooth with very few cracks, so they can't maybe climb up a perfectly smooth surface, but a thief can actually do that, moving 6 feet per round. So that's 10 minutes. If it's not slippery. If it's slippery, he can't do it at all. Okay, so you get the different non-slippery, slightly slippery, and slippery. They really do get into it here, don't they? They really do get into it. And that's part of the fun of the game. We have thieves and assassins setting traps. We have assassination experience points. You lose experience points if you're assassinating people lower level than you. So if you think about it, if it's an assassination attempt against a king who is sort of a 0-level human being, a high-level assassin could certainly do it. It's not really going to earn any experience points. Would earn a fee, on the other hand. We have the assassin's use of poison. Now, here again, resources come into it. When an assassin reaches 9th level, he or she may opt to make a study of poisons. This decision should come from the player in the case of a player character, i.e., do not suggest it or even intimate that such a study can be undertaken. The study will require many weeks, and cost from 2,000 to 8,000, so 2 die 4, gold pieces per week. The assassin must find a mentor, an assassin who has already made such a study and actually has put techniques into practice. In most cases, this will be a non-player character assassin of 12th or higher level. But again, it's going to take time. It's going to cost money. One of the things playing this game as I did when I was a kid, there are a lot of expenses in advanced D&D that we were kind of unaware of, frankly. So our characters were able to accumulate. The whole concept of you have so much money you can just start buying magical items? A lot tougher in the rules as written. You have a lot of expenses. A lot of expenses in this game. We get the different poison types, which I rather like. It's A, B, C, D, E for ingestive, A, B, and C, D for insinuative. So it doesn't get super into explaining every single kind of poison there could be. Keeps it a little simpler. We get a bit on the monster here as player character, which a lot of people liked, and which is called out specifically in the earliest rules as something people did. There was a famous vampire character called Sir Fang who, because he was so effective in the dungeon, led to the creation of the cleric class, which is kind of based on Van Helsing a little bit, as well as a religious knighthood. There was a Balrog that played in the early game. Kind of tells you, though, here, Advanced D&D is unquestionably humanocentric, with demi-humans, semi-humans, and humanoids in various orbits around the sun of humanity. Men are the worst monsters, particularly high-level characters such as clerics, fighters, and magic users, whether singly, in small groups, or in large companies. The ultra-powerful beings of other planes are more fearsome. The 3 Ds of demigods, demons, and devils are enough to strike fear into most characters, let alone when the very gods themselves are brought into consideration. Yet there is a point where the well-equipped high-level party of adventurers can challenge a demon prince, an archdevil, or a demigod, while there might well be some near or part humans with the group so doing. It is certain that the leaders will be human. Now, why is that? Well, because there's level limits. So the only way to get to really high levels to be able to challenge that stuff is with human beings. So he's saying, look, the game is geared towards human beings being at the center of things, being the most numerous characters in the game. Now, that's a far cry from nowadays, where you can barely find a human in some games, because everybody's a tiefling or an elf or what have you. But here it's expected you're mostly going to have humans. You'll have some, demi-humans for a little bit of flavor. But monsters, he's saying, look, in a human world, being a monster, trying to go on adventures, trying to go into towns and cities, that's going to be difficult. That's going to be tricky. It may not work that well. We get a whole lot on lycanthropy, which obviously folds into the idea as a monster, as a player character, because a PC could be turned into a werewolf. And we do have here, some players may not realize that any damage of over 50% of hit points sustained by bites in a fight with a lycanthrope may cause them to be afflicted by the disease. So that's kind of the threshold that you're working with there. And we have change table for lycanthropes or lycanthropes. As a kid, I always said lycanthrope, and I'm like, I don't think that's right. I think it's lycanthrope. But you learn some of these words when you're like 13 and you have no idea how to pronounce them. And there's really almost no way to find out how to pronounce them in the 1980s. You can't jump online and look it up, right? And then some of these pronunciations stay with you, and you learn the proper way, and you still fall back on the old one sometimes. Alignment. Oh, so many arguments about alignment. He makes it very clear here that this is really an alignment with a cosmic faction. Deities are involved, right? Now, he does say, note that alignment does not necessarily dictate religious persuasion, although many religious beliefs will dictate alignment. Okay, so, but there's the idea that once you've chosen an alignment, you're expected to stay there, be loyal to your faction. If you're not, there can be big problems. He talks about the major divisions of law and chaos, good and evil. I thought this was interesting, and there's a definite American perspective here. Basically stated, the tenets of good are human rights, or in the case of AD&D, creature rights. Each creature is entitled to life, relative freedom, and the prospect of happiness. Cruelty and suffering are undesirable. Evil, on the other hand, does not concern itself with rights or happiness. Purpose is the determinant. So in other words, good in AD&D is defined as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All I can say to that is USA. Anyways, but so he goes through, talks about all of these different alignments, but it really becomes important, though, when he says, look, you've got to graph the alignment of the characters. Players are going to be making choices. They're going to be doing things, right? What happens when they start to change alignment? In other words, a character has decided to be neutral good. What happens when the character starts acting more like chaotic good instead of neutral good? Well, there are ramifications of that. It says here, first, change of alignment for clerics can be very serious, as it might cause a change of deity. If a druid changes his or her alignment, that is, becomes other than neutral, then he or she is no longer a druid at all. And of course, we know that similarly with rangers, with paladins. It says change of alignment will have an adverse effect on any class of character if he or she is above the second level. Immediately upon alignment change actually occurring, the character concerned will lose 1 level of experience, dropping experience points to take him or her to the very beginning of the next lower level, losing the hit die and or hit points and all abilities which accrued to him or her with the lost level. If the alignment change is involuntary, such as that caused by a powerful magic, a curse, etc., then the character can regain all of the losses upon returning to his or her former alignment as soon as possible, and after making atonement through a cleric of the same alignment and sacrificing treasure which has a value of not less than 10,000 gold pieces per level of experience of the character. So think about that. I'm a 10th level lawful good fighter. I fail a saving throw, and I am changed to a different alignment. I become a 9th level fighter. Okay? Different alignment. Lawful neutral, we can say. I managed to break free of the curse. I change back to lawful good alignment. I can get that level back. Awesome. I got to do the atonement through a cleric. And I'm going to have to pay. Remember, I'm 9th level. I want to get back to 10th. And I guess you could interpret that. I'm going to have to pay 90 to 100,000 gold pieces to get that experience level back. If you're low enough in level, you might not even want to bother. You might want to just earn the experience back. But if you're high level, you probably want to. So again, there's a lot of things sucking gold pieces out of your purse in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons once you know all of them. So it goes through all of that stuff. So alignment's very important. And when we talk about experience points later and level and actually gaining level, it also plays a role there. Starting money for characters. Now here's another thing. Player character expenses. Each player character will automatically expend not less than 100 gold pieces per level of experience per month. This is simply support, upkeep, equipment, and entertainment expense, which means, by the way, you don't have to roleplay all that stuff out. You don't have to worry about that. You can go into the inn, order food, order drinks, and you don't have to sit there and actually pay for every penny of it in-game. But if your character's 3rd level, he's going to have to drop 300 gold pieces that month. It's included. That food, etc., is included in that, but you got to do it. Maintenance of henchmen. 100 gold pieces per level per month. Maintenance of stronghold, 1% of total cost of stronghold per month. So again, there is a heavy push to adventure. You retire a character, they're going to be out of money before you know it. Before you know it. And what does that mean? Does that mean they start losing levels that they've gained in the past because they can't pay for their upkeep or something? Maybe it does. Maybe that's one of the things you have to just kind of figure out as a dungeon master. But it definitely, there is an impetus to adventure and seek treasure in this game, and that's part of the game. And you can make the argument, well, it doesn't make sense. It's not realistic. It's a game. The game is about treasure. That's key to it. So that's why it's there. If you don't want to play a game about treasure, maybe you don't want to play Dungeons and Dragons. Value and reputed properties of gems and jewels. I remember this. And this is one of those images I just remember from when I was a kid, partly because if you're flipping through the book trying to find this table, you look for that picture. And I've said before, the organization's not bad in this exactly, but there's a lot of material. There's a lot to look for. And one of the ways you would do that as you're flipping through was you would be looking for a particular picture. So you'd associate in your mind that cartoon with these magic items. And you'd flip through and look for the cartoon, and that got you where you were going. It's one of the handy things about pictures in this book. But there's a lot of great stuff in here. The gem properties, which, what does it look like? Who the heck knows as a kid what azurite looks like? Or, rhodochrosite. You don't know. Well, it kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like. But also it tells you some of the things that are associated with them. So Alexandrite with good omens, chrysoberyl with protection from possession. Now he says, no, these gems do not have magic powers. But if your character is trying to make a magic item that involves calming the weather, then maybe the DM is going to require they use coral. They need to have inset coral in the thing because it kind of goes with that sort of thing. Get the idea. We get the armor class, and weapons, the kind of encumbrance with each one of these kinds of armor. It explains what all of them look like, which again, very useful when you were a kid and you had no idea what bandit armor was. You knew an armor class. If it was better than what you had, you wanted it. What did it look like? No friggin' idea. No idea at all. The shield use is kind of interesting. Small shields, bucklers, and other small shields, which are basically held with one hand, are moved rapidly by the wielder, but they cover only a small area, so they are less effective by and large. Such shields are less cumbersome and fatiguing in employment, however. So there's no distinction made between a small and a normal size shield in advanced D&D, but it kind of comes down to, well, how much can you block? How much does it protect you? You know, if there's like somebody, I don't know, a stream of steam at you, can you hide behind your buckler? No, you really can't. Maybe if you're a gnome, you can. They're only 2 feet tall, I think, a gnome. So that buckler might be like a large shield for them. But it does give you here, like, large shields are treated as but +1 to armor class rating without a shield. Optionally, you may allow them to add +2 to this armor class rating with respect to small, non-war engine or giant hurled missiles. So your large shield is going to give you an extra point, so to speak, of armor class against arrows, against crossbow bolts, things like that. But we get into all that kind of stuff and the weapon hit adjustments. We have all the hirelings here. Again, very important when you're doing the domain play afterwards. All the different kinds of mercenary soldiers through here. And you really got to read through all this stuff for what people are capable of doing and what they're not capable of doing. Blacksmith. There must be a blacksmith in any stronghold. And he and his assistants can care for the needs of up to 40 men or horses. Another smith is required for each additional 160 men or horses or fraction thereof. Besides the usual duties, horseshoes, things like that, a hired smith can turn out some weaponry each month. Each must have a workroom with bellows and forge, 30 arrowheads or quarrel tips, 10 spearheads, 5 morning stars, or 2 flails or pole arm heads. So you got to keep your troops equipped, especially if you're going into miniature, wargaming combat. That's what he can do, and it gives you that for everybody. The sages, especially, very interesting. It's almost like a non-player character class, with levels per se, but tells you what minor fields they understand, special categories to their major field that they understand. So it creates the sage as a character that maybe needs to be sought out. And that creates opportunities, I should say, for adventure. Well, we found this interesting writing in a dungeon. Nobody can read it. Okay, well, we need to go find this sage. Or maybe the cleric uses like a spell and they can read it, but they don't understand what they're talking about. Well, we need to go find a historian. So they leave. They go back to the town. They start asking around. Well, maybe the university in the capital city far away. And now you got a wilderness adventure to get to the capital city so they could talk to this historian. And maybe he takes a shot at it and he's unable to answer the question. Oh, well, my colleague, however, you get the idea. It could turn into a great big thing, but as long as you make it into an adventure, well, then it's fun to do. You don't want to have it just be boring paperwork. And of course, sages can be chaotic evil, chaotic good, chaotic neutral, any alignment. Hit points, 8 die 4 plus constitution bonuses as applicable, which means sages, they're not a pushover. They're not a pushover. You got to watch out for those guys if you get in a fight with them. It's campus politics. It gets pretty rugged sometimes. So there's a whole bunch on sages. A great little comic here with the mouse ears, the golden idol of the rat god. This had better work. I just remember that stuff. This is McLean who did these bits, and it's a very valued part of advanced D&D for me are these little comics. They were a big deal. So anyways, more on henchmen, level of prospective new henchmen, race of prospective henchmen, locale and racial distribution, etc. And they do go into, well, to finding them. Like, what are your chances of finding these people in a town, in a city? That becomes a game, a little sub-game all of its own. How loyal are they? And here's where all those, well, these are the modifiers. These are the modifiers to their loyalty. There's a lot of them. It's D&D. It's D&D. You get a whole lot of modifiers, a whole lot of tables. Just how it works. We were all nerds, so it worked for us. Time in the campaign. This is a really important section. Stuff that I will admit, pretty much ignored when I was younger and playing these games. Game time is of utmost importance. Failure to keep careful track of time expenditure by player characters will result in many anomalies in the game. The stricture of time is what makes recovery of hit points meaningful. Likewise, the time spent adventuring in wilderness areas removes concerned characters from their bases of operation, be they rented chambers or battlemented strongholds. Certainly the most important time stricture pertains to the manufacture of magic items, for during the period of such activity, no adventuring can be done. Time is also considered in gaining levels and learning new languages and more. All of these demands upon game time force choices upon player characters. Likewise, number their days of game life. Force choices. At the heart of pretty much every game are choices. You can't do everything. You got to make decisions. You got to make choices. So limited resources are very key. And if you're not limiting the resource of time, you're missing a major resource that forces interesting decisions out of player characters. And they talk a little bit about sort of, I'm trying to think the term they use. It gets argued about all the time. But basically using real time for game time to a certain extent. So if it's going to take a player character 2 weeks of game time to heal up to full hit points, then for 2 weeks, he's unavailable to play. That character is. Not the player, the character. So if everybody else, game gets going 3 days later, he's either got to play with a different character or he's out of luck. So we get all that. We get the time in the dungeon. We get character spells, day-to-day acquisition of cleric spells. Explains how it's done, that higher level spells come to you from the servants, supernatural servants of deities, or the really high level spells from the deity themselves. And that means, again, with member alignment, if you're a lawful good cleric and you're not being as lawful good as you could be, you might be barred from getting higher level spells, and they kind of go into what can be demanded of you. Acquisition of magic user spells. And here we have the little area where you can find out your starting spells for your magic level. Starting with 4 spells. Now, one of them is going to be read magic, because you have to have that. Then you could roll for an offensive spell, a defensive spell, or a miscellaneous spell. Now, remember, there's also that whole thing with, well, what spells are you capable of learning? That's in the player's handbook. So that could impact the rolls on this table as well. And then it gives you how you can gain new spells. And it goes into it, man. Like, you gotta, you can try to get spells from other NPCs, but how does it work? We get recovery spells. Spell recovery, whether cleric, druid, or magic user illusionist, requires about the same period of time. In order to pray and meditate for a new spell to replace one used, or in order to study and memorize such a spell, it is necessary that the spell user rest and revitalize his or her mental faculties. Whether one or more spells are to be regained, the minimum time required for complete rest, usually sleep, is that required for the highest level of spell to be recovered. Minimum rest periods are shown below. So if you need to try to get a 9th level spell back, you need 12 hours of rest, right? It again goes into game time. If you have to spend 12 hours in a really low level of a dungeon, there's a lot of potential wandering monsters in that time period. So it goes into the strategy of the whole thing. We get all the stuff on spell casting. Again, I'm not going to go super into all this stuff, but if you're playing the game, you really do need to read about it. Kind of tells you that the spells here are charged with energy from the positive or negative material planes. When uttered, these sounds cause the release of this energy. So where does the energy come from for these spells? And you could maybe argue that fire spells, the energy comes from the elemental plane of fire, but it sounds like really it should be the positive or negative planes. That's why alignment comes into it. We get the tribal spellcasters here, the shamans, the witch doctors, and how they work. Again, they're almost like little NPC classes for the monsters, and it's important because it tells you what kind of spells, like your orcs and your kobolds and all those guys, can actually cast. Some stuff is beyond them. Some stuff's beyond them, and it tells you the max level that they can get to as well, and gives you some descriptions here of each of the level of spells. Like, now, again, this is stuff nowadays that would probably be folded into the player's handbook. Put it all in one place. But here, it's like, well, players don't necessarily need to know all this stuff. So we'll leave it there for the dungeon master to be learning, and no one else. So we go through all that. Here's our glyphs of warding, what they look like, really kind of cool. This kind of stuff is some of the things that, the people who said D&D is satanic. That's what they were talking about because they had a picture of a magic circle and a pentagram in it. It's sad that happened to a lot of people. It is. It's just a game, folks. It really is just a game. Like I've always said, if all of us D&D nerds were actually learning magic, we would have been a lot more popular with the girls while we were in junior high and in high school and in college. We weren't. So it's a good bet we were not actually learning any real magic spells. Now, the adventure. This is giving you stuff on adventures in the outdoors. Oh boy, does it go into everything. On hexes. It goes into, chances of encounters in different kinds of wilderness, frequency of encounters. So if you're working through the plains, you make a roll in the morning, one in the evening, one at midnight, for the chance of a monster encounter. And if the population in the area, and I guess that has to do with, the human or humanoid, human or demi-human population. In other words, is it built up? Is it civilized? If it's highly civilized, it's a 1 in 20 chance. If it's uninhabited wilderness, it's a 1 in 10 chance. So 1, 2, 3 rolls in the plains. Okay. In a wilderness area, probably on a given day you won't have an encounter, but in a week, you almost certainly are going to have an encounter. If you're in a marsh, you check in the morning, noon, evening, night, midnight, and pre-dawn. 6 chances. That means in a marsh area, every 2 days, you're going to have some monster encounter for sure. And if the DM rolls crazy, you could have more. And those potential fights, now remember there are rules for evasion, but if you do get into fights, then you have to recover the hit points, which means you have to stay in the marsh longer, which means you might have more encounters in the marsh. So you might have to try to march out of the marsh back to civilization so you can rest up and try the whole thing again. You see where time becomes very, very important. Here's a great image from Darlene. I want to say I think some of it is maybe based on some classical art, at least style-wise. I'm not saying it's like a copy or anything like that. But I think I've seen some line illustrations in the past, and they reminded me of this. Because I think I wanted to use one of them in one of my rule books just because it would be reminiscent of this Darlene picture. In this one, there's stuff for movement, for becoming lost, for rest, for forced movement. There's adventures in the air and aerial combat. There is attack modes of different aerial creatures and how they do what they do. And they don't leave anything behind. They really don't. And here's, the turns that you make in the air and how difficult they are. What a 90-degree turn is. I do like that they go into some of that stuff too. It was very helpful as a kid where maybe you hadn't learned stuff like degrees, a whole lot in school. So many of us, we increased our vocabulary and our math abilities playing this game. So, you were already maybe one of the nerdy kids. These games actually maybe even put you further ahead than you would have been. We get the waterborne adventures, different kinds of boats, gets into the length and width of all this stuff, which is important if you're doing combat and things of that nature. Underwater adventures, real pain in the butt to run, gives you distance of vision underwater, movement, combat underwater. Telling you what, dungeon masters, generally speaking, don't get paid, and I don't think I'd ever want to get paid as a DM. You're playing with friends, but man, do you put in some hours of work. You get travel in the known planes of existence. Great stuff there. Infravision and ultravision. How does this stuff work again? Well, it explains it again for you. Ultravision, for example, which again got turned into dark vision, which was you can see in the dark. That's not how infravision worked. It's not how ultravision worked. Ultravision was useful, up above. Once you're underground, there's the radiation you're perceiving isn't there. It's blocked. But up on the surface, if it's nighttime, you could see things as though it's about twilight, which improves your ability to fight monsters, evade, sneak up on people, etc. But the infravision specifically is about about heat and seeing the heat of things, which means like the undead, for example. They're invisible to you if you have infravision. They don't give off any body heat because, they're dead. But dark vision will see them. So the change to dark vision was a major change for the game and what people could do. Even if a lot of us, again, kind of sloppy, were treating infravision kind of like dark vision anyways. Detection of evil and or good. It is important to make a distinction between character alignment and some powerful force of evil or good when this detection function is considered. In general, only a no alignment spell will determine the evil or good a character holds within. It must be a great evil or a strong good to be detected. Characters who are very strongly aligned, do not stray from their faith, and who are of relatively high level, at least 8th, might radiate evil or good if they are intent upon appropriate actions. So detect good will pick up the high level paladin if he's in the middle of being good. And if he doesn't stray at all, from which if you're a paladin, you really can't stray. But if you don't stray, then you might pick him up. But I remember my players in 3rd edition, they'd walk into a room and want to detect evil. And I think in 3rd edition, it was sort of like, yeah, we'll detect evil people, evil characters, sure. Not so here. Doesn't work that way. Listening at doors. And now you're getting into old school dungeon survival, stuff that I remember teaching my daughter when we would play the game and that she has carried over to playing with her friends. Always listen at doors. You tap on things with a 10-foot pole, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you had to do all that kind of stuff in this game because there's so many dangers jumping out right at you. Combat, encounters, combat, and initiative. Now they go over, they talk a little bit about combat in the player's handbook, but here's where you really get a lot of stuff that you're going to need to understand. Surprise, which again, difficult concept in the game because there's chance to surprise, there's chance of being surprised. One of them's rolled on a die 6, the other one might be rolled on a die 8. Well, how does that exactly work? Well, it kind of gives you a little bit about that in terms of how many segments of a round you lose based upon how surprised you are and how surprised they are. You get all the stuff on distance, line of sight, on noise, actually. So a lot of stuff here. You really, really need to read through all of this stuff. It's important because if you ignore certain rules of combat, you might be giving advantages to some character classes over other character classes. So you want to make sure everybody's playing by all the rules so nobody's getting a bonus that they shouldn't be getting. You have the whole initiative thing, which they were using one side versus another, what you do with ties, inflicting damage, except as noted under ties above. Damage or the general results of some attack routine, such as a turning of undead or casting of a slow spell, is inflicted upon the reacting party prior to allowing these creatures their portion of action in the melee round. So you do damage to the orc, and it's enough to kill him, and you're not going to get attacked back. Unless it's a tie, in which case all that stuff happens sort of simultaneously. You get encounter reactions. Really important. Really important, because every time you run into orcs doesn't mean you're instantly in a fight. Yeah, they're evil. They're evil. They probably like to fight you, but they might not. You know, it's even possible it'll be friendly. No, I think there's limitations in terms of the alignment on that, but you get avoiding. How do you avoid fights? Parlaying. How do you talk with other people? This is really important to the game. A lot of this stuff is thrown out in more modern versions of the game. Every encounter is a fight. You know, it just turns into that. But it was not the way the old school players would tell you. As soon as you start rolling dice, you sort of screwed up. You should be able to figure out a way to get that treasure without having to fight anything. Be clever, be sneaky, be tricky. Make alliances in the dungeon, you know, that kind of stuff, so that you could get to the stuff with the least amount of resistance, because when you start losing hit points, it can all start going south really, really, really fast. Missile discharge. Okay. So in other words, arrows, crossbow quarrels, or bolts. And what impacts? Strength bonus considerations. How does the strength, impact that stuff? Well, maybe. Dexterity. Well, of course, dexterity is going to have something on it. Here's missile fire cover. The armor class bonus that you get, which again meant you were subtracting this number, not adding it to the armor class, because that would be bad, because armor class went from high to low. But we just learned it. It seems confusing, and yet somehow tons of 12-year-olds managed to play this game without any problem. People telling you now that it's so confusing. It's so... Maybe this isn't the game for you. If we could all play it when we were 12, you just read and you figure it out. You do it enough times and it becomes second nature to you. Hell, I remember having to sort of think about the ascending armor class when I played 3rd edition at first, because I was just used to it going the other direction. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, obviously it was a somewhat simpler system, but spellcasting during melee, big deal. Big deal. Spellcasters must know what spell they intend to cast at the beginning of each round, prior to any knowledge of which side has initiative. So you don't get to know that right away. So if it's a longer spell, you might be losing initiative and you might be out of luck. Attacks directed at spellcasters will come on that segment of the round, shown on the opponent's or on their own side's initiative dice, whichever is applicable. If the spellcaster's side won the initiative with a roll of 5, the attack must come then, not on the opponent's losing roll of 4 or less. Thus, all such attacks will occur on the 1st to 6th segments of the round. So when you're rolling for initiative with a die 6, that tells you which round these attack, or which segment of the round these attacks are going to happen on. It's a little complicated. 10 segments, but you're only rolling a die 6. That's why he says that there. Intelligent monsters able to recognize the dangerous spells will direct attacks against spellcasters if not engaged by other opponents, so as to be prevented from so doing. The spellcaster cannot use his or her dexterity bonus to avoid being hit during spellcasting. Doing so interrupts the spell. In other words, you can't be moving around and dodging. You got to stand still and cast the spell. Any successful attack or non-saved against attack upon the spellcaster interrupts the spell. This is a major limitation on the ability of magic users in combat. It is huge. If you ignore it, magic users become a lot more powerful. And it does tell you that, that spell's lost. It's gone. You're trying to cast Magic Missile, you got bonked on the head, Magic Missile's gone. Sorry, buddy. Try something different. So it's a big deal. And that gets into the strategy and the tactics of the game. You got to protect your magic user. You got to cover them up. Although if they need line of sight, that could get a little iffy. Well, what about arching attacks over? Well, is there enough room? Is the ceiling high enough? That gets into the tactical stuff of the game, and which is fun stuff. Monster charm power. turning undead. How does that exactly work? And evil clerics and controlling the undead. You want to read through all that stuff. It's very important. Very important. And then it gives all sorts of different other actions you could do and how those things will work. There's a lot to it. Pursuit and evasion of pursuit is a big deal. Morale is a big deal. Do the monsters stay and fight? Do your henchmen stay and fight? Or do they just, get the you-know-what out of dodge? So, yeah, love it. Love that picture. The skeleton coming up behind the guy pounding on the door. He's busy worrying about the trap, and he doesn't notice that. That's D&D. You come into this room, there's skeletons on the floor. They seem to be dead. I mean, really dead. Skeletons, no big deal. Uh-oh, water starts pouring in. The door seals. What are you going to do? And then that's when the animated skeletons decide to attack. I like the modifiers to pursuit as well, right? Distractions, food, treasure. So you could throw like a bag of coins and maybe the monsters will stop and do that instead. Light, noise, odors. It's just, there's so much here. They called it Advanced D&D because it was Advanced D&D. Number of opponents per figure. So here we kind of get into different ways you can organize this stuff. How many people can attack you? Some of that does find its way into 3rd edition with the more miniature-based combat that they did there, which, it had its advantages and it had some major disadvantages. The biggest problem with 3rd edition combat, it could really take a while. I mean, when they said you should have like a party of 4 people, they kind of meant it. Because I tended to play with larger groups, 6 to 8 people, and I'm telling you what, people were they're losing interest because it takes so long to get back to their turn to fight. Of course, they never spent that time learning how their spells actually worked or how grappling worked, but we won't get into that. We get it all in a large example of melee to help people through all of that. Here's our pummeling. Oh, pummeling and grappling. Speaking of grappling, there's a lot to it, but there's a reason. And maybe this is a weakness of D&D. It has an abstract combat system in terms of hit point loss. Based upon, you're not necessarily being hit every time you lose hit points. The problem here is that, if I can grapple somebody, then somebody can just stab them and they die. There's nothing ambiguous about that. So it seems like grappling somebody should be easier than sword fighting them. But if it is easier, then everybody's just going to grapple and go for a sliced throat or something like that in the game. They're not going to go through the trouble of actually fighting a melee. So they have to come up with a lot of rules for this stuff so it isn't overpowered. And now we get to the combat tables. Boy, we spent a lot of time here. Again, that sword was one of those things you looked for as you're flipping through, looking for the combat tables. I mean, if you didn't have a bookmark in there or something like that. Psionic versus psionic mental combat. So we get a lot of tables. And again, we're not going to go through all of these. It takes forever. But, this is psionic blast and how it affects you with saving throws, short, medium, long range, and the wisdom or intelligence. I guess wisdom and intelligence combined of the target and how that impacts them. We get the saving throws. Now, saving throws are interesting things. There's the item saving throws. Let's see. Here we have the stuff about saving throws. Here's the saving throw matrix. Now, I'm trying to think if this still, in the earlier versions of the game, the easiest saving throw was against the most dire form of attack. So you notice paralyzation, which if you're paralyzed, you're helpless. Death, magic, or just death in general. Poison, which could often be deadly. That's your easiest saving throw for most of the classes. Because it's the one that's going to take you right out of the game. Although here, for the magic user, it is not. For the thief, it is not. It's not their easiest. petrification, and polymorph are. Now, why are those less dire? Well, if you're petrified, I mean, you're helpless, but they can't stab you because you're made of stone. I mean, they could throw you off a cliff, and they probably would. If you're polymorphed, you could come back to what you were. So it's not quite as permanent. You could be saved from those things, maybe a little easier than these other things, which all lead straight to death. Rod, staff, or wand, and spell. Now, the idea here is, and I think this holds pretty close, basically, you save at +1 against spells from rods, staves, and wands. It's one easier than the spell save. And then there's breath weapon, which again, not easy to save from, but even though it can do a lot of damage, if you're a high level character, that damage might not kill you. If you're low level and you run up against a dragon, you have problems that are just maybe insurmountable. But you get the idea of how the save was easier the worse the attack was, which tells you this is not a game about just wiping out the players, because that's not very fun, but there's still the danger. There's still the danger of all that kind of stuff happening. They give you some modifiers based on DM stipulations, which means the DM can interject modifiers of his own based upon the situation. Based on rules, there's magical devices and protections, circumstantial adjustments, certain failure. As shown on the table, a 1 is always a failure, regardless of magical modifiers to the contrary. However, as DM, you may adjust such failures according to prevailing circumstances, although any adjudication which negates failure on a roll of 1 is not recommended at all. You can do it, but you probably shouldn't do it. And so it gives you a little rationale on how these things work. And really think about it as being literary, right? It's oh my goodness, how could the character survive? Think about the cliffhangers, right? The car's going off the cliff. My goodness, the Green Hornet must be killed. No, the Green Hornet made his saving throw, and he managed to jump out of the car at the last second and wasn't killed, and goes on to fight the bad guys. That's what a saving throw really is designed to be. I think they got maybe a little bit overused in later versions of the game. Save for everything. And now there's save against actual just hit point loss, death, and it's kind of like, what? It's weird stuff to us old timers. If you're young and that's how you started playing, it makes perfect sense. Great cartoon with the rust monster and the fighter in the play mail jumping up into the arms of the wizard. So saving throws. Hit points. What happens at 0 hit points? You're dead. Recovery of hit points. Now, again, some of that's covered in the player's handbook, but we get it again here. And big thing for hit points. And this is something people routinely misunderstand about D&D. And it's kind of laid out for you. It is quite unreasonable to assume that as a character gains levels of ability in his or her class, that a corresponding gain in actual ability to sustain physical damage takes place. It is preposterous to state such an assumption, for if we are to assume that a man is killed by a sword thrust, which does 4 hit points of damage, we must similarly assume that a hero could, on the average, withstand 5 such thrusts before being slain. Why then the increase in hit points? Because these reflect both the actual physical ability of the character to withstand damage, as indicated by constitution bonuses, and a commensurate increase in such areas as skill in combat and similar life or death situations. The sixth sense, which warns the individual of some otherwise unforeseen events, sheer luck, and the fantastic provisions of magical protections, etc. He even talks about Rasputin here. Now, I think another way to understand this, although I have found a lot of people have a lot of trouble understanding this, think about inflation. Inflation actually doesn't make things more expensive. It makes your money less valuable. So people say, you used to be able to buy a steak with a dime. Well, that's because a dime was worth a heck of a lot more money once upon a time than it is today because of inflation. In other words, the more money you print, the less each dollar is worth. Okay? So likewise, when you're going up in level, it's almost like what you're really doing is you're minimizing the damage that attacks actually physically cause you, or the dire straits that they put you in. So the 4 points of damage that kills a first level character, when you take 4 points of damage at 10th level, it's like that's not really being stabbed by a sword. That's maybe almost being stabbed by a sword, nearly being stabbed by a sword. It's not a real stab. Those points of damage have much more weight on the first level character than they do on the 10th level character. Kind of think of it that way. It's kind of like inflation. Effects of alcohol and drugs. I like it. Effect on bravery, on morale. So if you're greatly intoxicated, you get a +4 on your bravery, which it would probably more impact. It says covered in the non-player character characteristics, but you could maybe even rule that for like saves against fear for a player character. Morale plus 15%. So what you want to do if you got a tough combat a tough combat coming up, is get your troops maybe just slightly drunk first. And they might fight longer for you. I actually have never thought of that before, but I'm going, it's actually not, that's not untrue. It would kind of work, maybe. It's exactly the kind of weird scheme you come up with in D&D when you're having fun. We get insanity and the types of insanity. This psionic combat can cause insanity. Of course, there's a spell that does that as well. All right. Experience. Man, we're going to have to probably cut off here pretty soon and do a part 2. I think we're going to start part 2 on the campaign. So we're coming up to the end of part 1 here. But let's go over experience, because there's some interesting stuff in here that a lot of folks don't necessarily remember when they're playing the game. The judgment factor is inescapable with respect to weighting experience for the points gained from slaying monsters and or gaining treasure. You must weigh the level of the challenge, be it thinking or fighting, versus the level of experience of the player characters who gained it. If you're a high-level character and you're taking on an orc, you get less experience fighting that orc than you would as a first-level character. What it means is, if your plan is to gain high levels by killing lots of weak opponents, which I know that you get that in a lot of video games, that kind of work off a D&D style, it's going to be really difficult. You're going to have to wipe out thousands and thousands and thousands of orcs to really make it worth your while for all the experience points that you need to gain. But we get all that with treasure, with experience value of monsters. You can see where I've underlined things back in the day. I didn't write in my books a lot, but I wrote in them a little bit. Special bonus award to experience points if there's extreme dangers. Gaining experience levels. Now this gets interesting. And alignment comes in here. Experience points are merely an indicator of the character's progress towards greater proficiency in his or her chosen profession. Upward progress is never automatic. Just because Neil Nimblefingers, rogue of the Thieves Guild, has managed to acquire 1,251 experience points does not mean that she suddenly becomes, it's Nell, not Neil, sorry. Nell Nimblefingers, the footpad. The gaining of sufficient experience points is necessary to indicate that a character is eligible to gain a level of experience. The actual award is a matter for you, the DM, to decide. Which means as DM, if I don't get a bribe, your character's... No, it doesn't mean that. Consider the natural functions of each class of character. Consider also the professed alignment of each character. Briefly assess the performance of each character after an adventure. Did he or she perform basically in the character of his or her class? Were his or her actions in keeping with his or her professed alignment? Mentally classify the overall performance as excellent, superior, fair, or poor. E equals 1, S equals 2, F equals 3, P equals 4. Clerics who refuse to help and heal or do not remain faithful to their deity, fighters who hang back from combat or attempt to steal or fail to boldly lead, magic users who seek to engage in melee or ignore magic items they could employ in crucial situations. So you get the idea. If you do a crap job of playing, you can get a poor rating. All right. Award experience points normally When each character is given his or her total, also give them an alphabetic rating, E, S, F, or P. When a character's total experience points indicate eligibility for an advancement in level, use the alphabetic assessment to assign equal weight to the behavior of the character during each separate adventure, regardless of how many or how few experience points were gained in each. The resulting total is then divided by the number of entries to come up with some number from 1 to 4. This number indicates the number of weeks the character must spend in study and or training before he or she actually gains the benefits of the new level. Be certain that all decimals are retained as each, like 0.145 equals a game day. A game day. Remember, we're doing the timekeeping here. Not only must game time be spent by the character desiring advancement, the treasure will have to be spent as well. The amount of gold pieces or the equivalent in value in gems, jewelry, magic items, etc. is found by using the following simple formula. Level of the trainee character, so your present level, not the one you're trying to get to, times 1,500 equals weekly cost during study training. So if your play has been pretty uniformly poor, it's going to take you 4 weeks of training to get to your next level. It's going to cost you more gold pieces to get there. So that's important. That's important. There is a mechanism in the game to force you to play the role that you've chosen to play. You don't have perfect freedom. So if you're a chaotic evil thief, you better play that role to the hilt. If you don't, it's going to cost you money. And if you're a thief, of course, you would probably hate that. Okay. We're going to end part 1 of the Dungeon Master's Guide right here. We'll start up next time with the campaign, because I got to have a break somewhere in here. We've already talked for a little over an hour, but I hope this is useful for folks who are new to the game, or maybe they played for a while and they just kind of played like I did, where we sort of picked and chose what we used. But I think what you see is a picture that comes together of the importance of really understanding the rules, and that this is an advanced game. It gets into things quite a bit. And a lot of the stuff that may seem a little ticky-tack or unimportant, he gives the rationale for it. And it does have an impact. Time has a major impact on this game. It's not something you hand wave. You can hand wave it, but if you do, you're maybe handing some severe advantages to certain character classes because of that. So you want to really stick to this stuff and you really want to learn it. It's well worth reading. It's a lot of reading to do, but Gygax has a pretty good style. He's pretty fun to read. It's very conversational, and I highly suggest that you do it if you are an advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master. So there we go. Part 1 of the DM's Guide in Dad's Den. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you have any questions, or if I got anything wrong, let me know, or I missed anything critical, because by golly, I might have done it. I've often joked that to this day, I can just open this thing to a random page and point to something and I'll be like, I didn't realize that. Oh, crap. Because there is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff there. It's very dense. But let me know in the comments what you think. If you enjoyed this little review, please give it a like, maybe subscribe, maybe share with a friend. That would be very cool. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. Read your DM's Guide. And if you don't have one, dude, hit eBay and get one. This is maybe one of the greatest role-playing game works ever created. There's so much good advice in this thing. You should definitely have a copy if you are a role-playing gamer. I will then see you again, hopefully soon, in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.